Right. So you're here because, let's be honest, we
Yeah.
all want to really figure out relationships right. And today, we're going deep on codependency. We've
Yeah.
got some really interesting material. And, if that idea of like needing someone too much
Yeah.
or like relying on them too much,
hmm
if that feels familiar,
Right.
we're going to like break it all down today.
Absolutely.
And more importantly,
Yeah.
we're going to look at how to actually build those healthier relationships without getting like lost in all the,
Right.
psychobabble.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And I think the word codependency itself can almost feel like a
Like a judgment.
judgment or a label.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be that way, right?
Right.
What's really cool about what we've been looking at is how much this is really just about patterns in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about, being helpful.
Yeah.
It's about when does that helpfulness become so imbalanced that
Yeah.
you actually lose yourself
Right.
or your well-being starts to really suffer. And so our mission today is to kind of pull back the curtain on that and give you a sense of like, okay, what are those patterns so I can see them in my own life?
Yeah.
And then what do I do about it?
Right. So let's dive in.
Yeah.
Let's start with how to even recognize if this is something that is,
Right.
at play in our lives.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's so interesting about the steps we've been reading is that it's not like you're either codependent or you're not. It's
Right.
like a spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you might see little bits of these different
Yeah.
characteristics or
Traits.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And not necessarily the full-blown thing.
Right.
But the one thing that kept coming up over and over again
Yeah.
was this idea of having difficulty saying no.
Oh, yeah.
Like that simple word, no. Why is it so hard for us sometimes?
I think it's because, and a lot of the stuff that we read points to this,
Mm-hmm.
this really deep fear of disappointing people. And it's almost like our sense of worth gets tied up in whether or not someone else approves of us.
Right.
And so it's less about the no and more about the anxiety that comes up around what that no will do.
Yeah.
Will they still like me? Will they still love me?
Right.
Will they leave me?
It's more than just being nice, right?
Absolutely.
It's like a need to be needed.
Yeah,
You know?
totally.
And another thing the material kept pointing to was this feeling of responsibility for other people's happiness.
Oh, yeah.
Like it's somehow our job to manage their feelings,
Mm-hmm.
and if they're not happy, then we've done something wrong.
I think one of the things that's really insightful about that is, empathy is so important in relationships.
Yeah.
But what the sources point to is when that empathy kind of gets warped into thinking that you're in control of someone else's emotions.
Yeah.
And that's just never the case.
Right.
And actually when we start to think that way,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't actually allow the other person to take responsibility for their own experience.
Right. And that leads to this,
Yeah.
people pleasing.
Absolutely.
Like we're constantly trying to win approval,
right.
avoid conflict at all costs, even if it means,
Sacrificing yourself.
yeah, like completely stuffing down our own
You need.
needs and desires. And
Totally. What's really interesting is that a lot of this comes down to a sense of self.
Hmm.
Like if we don't have a strong internal sense of worthiness,
yeah,
then a lot of times we'll look outside of ourselves to find it.
yeah.
And so this fear of being alone also comes up a lot
Mm-hmm.
in the material. And I
Wow.
think that drives this need to maintain connection even if the connection isn't healthy.
Right, right. And one of the sources actually had this really interesting list
Yeah.
of questions.
Mm-hmm.
And it was almost like, okay, do any of these ring true for you?
Right.
And I thought that was so interesting as a way to kind of like
Yeah.
self-assess,
Absolutely.
And I want to go through some of those with you.
Right.
And again, this isn't about diagnosing yourself,
Right.
but just like honest reflection.
Yeah. Yeah.
So think about this for a second.
Okay.
Do you feel like you can't even function
Mm-hmm.
or be okay if you don't have a partner?
Right.
And is the thought of them leaving like genuinely terrifying?
I think that brings up a really important distinction between healthy interdependence
Mm-hmm.
and codependency.
Okay.
In a healthy relationship, there's this mutual support and reliance.
Yeah.
But in codependency, that becomes so extreme that we feel like we can't even survive on our own.
Right.
It's less about, I want to be with you, and more like, I need to be with you
Right.
in order to be okay.
Right. And how about this one?
Okay.
Do you constantly feel responsible for how your partner feels?
Mm-hmm.
Like if they're upset, do you immediately assume it's your fault
Right.
and feel this like
urge.
Yeah, this like urge to fix it for
I
them.
think that's another big piece of this.
Yeah.
Because while caring about your partner's well-being is, of course, natural,
Right.
feeling solely responsible for their emotional state
Yeah,
is just so draining.
it is.
And it actually, like we were saying before, can keep them from really dealing with their own stuff.
Right. And this one really hit home for me.
Okay.
Is it consistently more important
Mm-hmm.
that the people around you are happy,
Yeah.
even if it means sacrificing your own happiness and well-being?
Right.
You know?
It's like we were talking about that self-neglect.
Yeah.
It comes from this belief often
Yeah.
that our own needs are somehow less valid,
Yeah.
less important. And sometimes we don't even realize we're doing it.
It's just like this automatic.
Yeah, it's automatic.
Right. And the
Yeah.
list kind of goes on. There's things like feeling more capable of handling hardship than anyone else
Right.
and taking on other people's suffering
Right.
as your own,
Mm-hmm.
going to like these extreme lengths to avoid conflict. Even if it means compromising like your own values,
Right.
and then that big one saying no,
Yeah.
right?
And that no can be such a simple word.
It is.
But I think for people who have codependent tendencies,
Mm-hmm.
it brings up this fear
Yeah.
of rejection,
Right.
disappointing others.
It's all tied up in that worthiness thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so another one. What about this
Right.
being afraid to speak your mind or
Mhm.
share your true feelings in your relationships?
Right.
Like, that suggests there's not a lot of emotional safety there.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah.
Right. And it's almost like we're worried about the consequences
Yeah.
of really being ourselves.
Right.
So
And it's got to lead to this feeling of
Yeah.
not really knowing who you are
Truly.
because you're not letting yourself be you.
Exactly.
Right.
And if we never show that true self,
Yeah.
then it's hard for anyone else to really connect with it.
And then there's some more like practical things, like
Yeah.
not having hobbies or interests
Mhm.
that are just yours
Yeah.
outside of your relationships.
Right.
Or feeling like your entire identity is wrapped up
Yeah.
in the roles that you play.
Yes.
Like the caregiver,
Right.
the helper, the partner.
That's where it gets, it can shrink our world
Yes.
in a way.
Yes.
And we talk about codependency as like this enmeshment, where the lines get blurred.
Right.
And then we start to lose those parts of ourselves
Yeah.
that make us unique.
And what about this one? This one was kind of a heavy one,
Okay.
but like engaging in these excessive caretaking behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
So like constantly worrying about others,
Yeah.
monitoring their lives,
Mm-hmm. Right.
maybe even enabling unhealthy behaviors.
Feels like we're always on edge.
Yeah.
Right.
And then feeling detached from your own feelings.
Oh, yeah.
Almost like you're watching your life from a distance,
Mm.
And
that's a defense mechanism.
it is.
It's like
Yeah.
we get so overwhelmed by other people's feelings
Yeah.
that we numb out our own.
Right. And then these last couple,
Yeah.
the feeling of not knowing who you are or what you want in life,
Right.
struggling to make even small decisions independently,
Mm-hmm.
and finding it like impossible to ask for help,
Yeah.
when you need it.
It really is about our sense of self getting kind of lost
Yeah.
in the needs and expectations of others.
Yeah. And I think one of the maybe most challenging things that this material pointed to was the difficulty in leaving relationships that are clearly toxic
Right.
or even abusive.
It's almost like that fear of being alone
Yeah.
is stronger
Yeah.
than the need to actually take care of ourselves.
Yeah. It's like it overrides our own
Yeah.
survival instincts almost.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it.
And again, all of these are,
Right.
just kind of like a jumping off point for your own reflection.
Self-assessment.
Yeah, exactly. And if any of this really resonates with you,
Yeah.
it's worth reaching out to a professional,
Absolutely. Get support.
get support.
Mm-hmm.
But the good news is
Yeah.
that this material also lays out
Liz.
like some very specific steps
Mm-hmm.
that you can start taking towards recovery.
Absolutely.
And the very first step is education.
Yeah. And that might seem obvious, but
Yeah.
really understanding codependency, like what it is,
Mm-hmm.
how it shows up, that's really important. And
Yeah.
and also, I think another piece of that is understanding your triggers.
Yes.
What are the
What sets you off?
Yeah, what sets you off?
What are those situations or those people or those feelings
Yeah.
that kind of bring out,
Those codependent behaviors.
those behaviors, right?
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
is it abandonment?
Right.
Is it low self-esteem?
Yeah.
Is it,
Control.
eating control? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is it for you?
And once you know that, you can start to become more conscious,
Yeah.
about, okay, this is happening.
Right.
This is what I tend to do.
Yeah.
And can I choose something different?
Right. And the next step was really interesting. It was reflecting on your family of origin.
Oh, yeah.
They can be kind of a
Loaded.
a loaded
It
topic.
can bring up some stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
But,
But it's so important.
it's so important because
Well,
so many of these patterns that we learn come from, our early experiences in our families.
So think about those primary relationships with your caregivers.
Right.
Were they emotionally available to you?
Yeah.
Were they physically absent?
Mm-hmm.
Did they themselves have these kind of codependent behaviors?
Yeah. Good point.
And to take it even further,
Yeah.
think about,
Yeah.
were there healthy boundaries in your family?
Oh, yeah.
Did things feel enmeshed or too close?
Too close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of our sources actually had these really great,
Yeah.
journaling prompts,
Yeah.
for this specific section.
Totally.
And I thought they were so useful. So,
Mhm.
how comfortable were you sharing your emotions,
Right, yeah.
expressing your needs within your family?
Yeah.
Were there things like addiction or mental health issues?
Mm-hmm.
And did you end up kind of taking on that caregiver role?
Right.
Maybe for a parent or a sibling?
Yeah.
Was criticism or neglect or even abuse
Yeah.
something that was frequent in your experience?
Yeah.
And did you ever have this deep fear of being alone
Right.
or abandoned by your caregivers?
I think what's so telling is that, these early experiences can really shape what we expect in our adult relationship.
Yes, totally.
So for instance, if you grew up
Yeah.
in a home where your needs weren't met,
Yeah.
and emotionally,
Yeah.
you might find yourself
Yeah.
unconsciously drawn to partners who are also emotionally unavailable.
So you're recreating.
Yeah, you're recreating it,
Yeah.
even if you don't want to.
Right.
It's familiar.
And that leads us to the next step, which is identifying patterns in your adult relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And this one was really interesting.
Okay.
The material talked about this concept called repetition compulsion.
Yes.
And so it's like our subconscious
Right.
has learned these ways of relating,
Mm-hmm.
even if they weren't healthy.
Right.
And it tends to just play those same patterns
I'd repeat.
on repeat,
Yeah.
in our new relationships.
It's like our brain is on a loop,
It is.
trying to work through these old dynamics.
Yeah.
And we don't even realize it.
And so becoming aware of these patterns
Yeah.
is so crucial.
Yeah.
Once you can start to see the common threads,
Mm-hmm.
like, are you constantly the giver
Right.
in the relationship?
Yeah.
Or are you always trying to fix your partner?
Yeah.
Like, once you see those things, you can actually start making different choices.
You have the power.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one of the sources suggested this, really practical exercise.
Oh, cool.
I love this one.
Okay.
It was like creating this relationship history table.
Okay.
And so for each significant relationship in your past,
Okay.
you reflect on things like, how did it start?
Mm-hmm.
What was your first impression?
Okay.
What attracted you to them?
Right.
Positive and negative aspects of the relationship.
Yeah.
How and why it ended.
Mm-hmm.
Would you ever consider getting back together?
Okay.
And this is the big one. What codependent features were present?
Yeah.
Looking back at that list,
Yeah.
it's so interesting.
It's like you're kind of a detective
You are.
in your own life.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and you start to see those themes.
Mm.
And then you can start to understand, okay, what role did I play in this?
Right. And that's where the awareness comes in.
Yeah.
Right.
And then the next step is really about turning the focus inward.
Okay.
It's exploring yourself as an individual.
Right.
And the material was so clear that a core characteristic of codependency is this suppression
Mm-hmm.
of your own needs, your desires, your identity,
Right.
in favor of others.
In favor of other people.
Yeah.
Really.
And so recovery has to involve rediscovering yourself.
It's almost like we have to reclaim ourselves.
Yes. And reconnect with that authentic self.
And what matters most to us.
Yes.
And that brings up this whole idea of values.
Yeah.
What are your core values? What truly matters to you?
Yeah.
And some of the questions that the material posed were so good.
Yeah, I love them.
Who do you spend the majority of your time with?
Yeah.
What are the things that give you energy, versus draining you?
Yes.
What are the things that you love to talk about?
Yes.
If you could think back
Yeah.
to a time when you were maybe less influenced by your relationships,
Mm-hmm.
what were your dreams?
Right.
What were your goals?
Right. It's like peeling back all those layers
Yes.
of the roles you play for everyone else.
Right.
And like who's underneath all of that.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And they talk so much about journaling.
Oh.
And I love that too.
Journaling is such a good tool
It is.
for this kind of work.
Yeah. It's like that safe space, just kind
Yeah.
of, brain dump.
Yeah. Get it all out.
Yeah.
Without judgment.
And then once you start to have that clearer understanding of yourself, the next step becomes even more important.
Right.
And that's establishing boundaries.
Boundaries. Oh my gosh.
I know. It's like
so important.
such a buzzword.
It is.
Right.
But there's a reason.
Like there's a reason.
Because it's really just about limits.
Yeah.
Like what's okay with me and what's not okay.
And I think for people with these codependent tendencies,
Yeah.
learning to not only set, but also enforce those boundaries.
Enforce them. That's the key.
It's so huge.
Yeah. We have to actually stand by them.
Yes.
And
the material suggested asking yourself some really good questions
Yeah.
to figure out what your boundaries even are.
Totally. Like, what do you need in a relationship?
Yeah.
What do you want?
What's your communication style?
Yeah. How do you like to be communicated with?
What are those like unhealthy things from past relationships
Right.
that you don't want to repeat?
Exactly.
Where do you need to draw the line
Yeah.
in terms of behavior and language?
Right as that line.
Right.
And what's your definition of a healthy relationship?
Yes.
And what does it mean to be an independent person?
And it's so important to start small.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's uncomfortable. Especially for the people around us who are used to us not having boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the material said something really interesting.
Okay.
The people who resist our boundaries the most are often the ones who benefit from us not having them.
Wow.
That
That is so true.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa.
It's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
And
a huge part of boundaries is learning to say no.
That's the word.
Without guilt.
Yeah. Without over-explaining.
Yeah. And like remembering that putting your needs first is not selfish.
It's not selfish.
It's like self-care.
Exactly.
Yeah. Which actually leads us to our next step, which is developing your independence.
Okay. Yeah.
And the material was so clear about this that having a fulfilling life and interests outside of your romantic relationships is such a boost.
Huge boost.
To your self-esteem.
Yeah.
And it reduces that dependency so much.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is where it gets fun.
Yeah.
Right? Like, let's cultivate those interests.
Yeah.
Let's pursue those hobbies.
Let's nurture the things that light us up.
Yes, and spending time apart from your partner isn't a threat to the relationship.
No.
Like the material actually said, it reinforces your individual worth.
Yeah, because it allows you to be more self-reliant.
Yes.
Instead
of seeking that validation and fulfillment
just
from your partner.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. And what's so wild is that
the
material also said that independence strengthens the relationship in the long run.
It's counterintuitive.
It is.
Yeah.
But it makes sense because it's like you've got these two whole people choosing to be together instead of these two halves trying to like desperately complete each other.
A much healthier dynamic.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this idea of self-care, the material called it quality time.
Yeah, I love that.
That you're dedicating to yourself. And it challenges this idea that self-care is selfish.
Totally.
Right.
It's not.
It's
We're taking care of ourselves.
Yeah.
Through all the things we know.
Yeah.
Eating well.
Sleeping, exercise.
Movement. Connecting with nature.
Meditation.
Mindfulness.
Yeah, it's essential.
It's essential.
It's not a luxury.
It's not a luxury.
It's a necessity.
Yeah.
And then our next step is really about going even deeper inward.
Okay.
It's practicing self-compassion.
Oh, yeah.
And the material touched on this idea that we often think enduring suffering and putting everyone else first is like strength.
Right. It's like a badge of honor.
Yeah. And that can be so prevalent in codependent patterns.
And what's so important is to remember that asking for help is actually a strength.
Yeah.
It's not a weakness.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of courage.
To be vulnerable like that.
Yeah, to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the material also, reminded us that these codependent traits often develop as coping mechanisms.
Right.
Like we learn to survive
Right.
in challenging environments.
Yeah.
And so self-compassion is key here.
Yeah.
It allows us to let go of that self-blame.
Yeah.
And just acknowledge that, hey,
we were doing the best we could.
we were doing the best we could.
Yeah. Yeah. And then finally, the material talked about the importance of open and honest communication with your partner.
Yes.
About your desire for more autonomy,
Right.
a healthier balance in the relationship.
Like actually saying, hey,
Yeah.
I need some space.
Yeah.
I want to do my own thing.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that kind of communication is so key
It is
for fostering understanding, respect, trust.
Doing that balance.
It allows you to clarify expectations,
Yeah.
address misunderstandings,
Right.
and even see if there's like a mutual
pattern.
Yeah, mutual over-reliance.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, are we both,
Yeah.
doing
Are we both too reliant?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's an act of self-advocacy.
It is.
It's like you're saying, hey, this is important to me.
Yeah.
My well-being is important.
It's that shift from the us against the world to the...
Two individuals in a partnership.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the last bit of guidance from the material was so simple, but so powerful.
I love it when it's like that.
I know.
Yeah.
Be patient.
Yes.
And take your time.
It's a process.
It is.
And I think we live in a culture that wants...
The quick fix?
The quick fix.
Yeah.
But this is a journey. This is a journey.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are going to be setbacks.
Oh, for sure.
There are going to be times when you feel like you take a step back.
Absolutely.
It's
not linear.
No, it's not linear.
It's messy.
Yeah.
No.
And the material suggested.
Yeah.
Continuing to track your progress. Like through journaling.
Yeah.
Or self-reflection. And I think most importantly.
Yeah.
Celebrating those successes.
Celebrate the wins.
No matter how small they are.
Even the tiny ones.